So today we're going to talk about sleep. We'll go kind of into why you should be sleeping, but we're going to spend more time on the kind of how to get a good night's sleep and how to be most efficient in that category. So we're going to try to give you some practical takeaway points here that you can apply to your life right away and hopefully make some improvements to your sleep. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how do you define a good night's of sleep, and how many hours of sleep do you currently get? So we get a little fancy. We got a little interaction here. So we're going to see how much sleep you guys get. So you should see a question on your screen, and you can answer how many hours of sleep do you get per night. Come on, 4 to 5. Who was that?
What?
We were doing so good. One more person has to answer.
That
Who's
was
missing?
Dan. That was absolutely Dan.
So we actually did pretty good. I can see the results here. You guys can't. But we had one person that said 4 to 5. They're going to be our main target of this conversation. We have 2 people in the 6 to 7 range. They could use some improvement there too. And then the rest of the people were in that 7 to 9 hour range, which is in fact where we want to be. So I think I can share the results there. See? Cool.
All right. So
one more thing. I know I added in extra slides. So the first question there was, how do you define a good night's sleep? And we're not going to go dive deep into this and what exactly sleep is, because that is somewhat out of our realm and is a very deep topic that there's a lot of questions about still. But the basic idea is that we have multiple stages of sleep. You have REM sleep, and you have different stages of sleep that are considered non-REM. And the only point that we want to make with this slide is that you need to experience all the stages of sleep to have quality sleep. So if you're doing something that might disrupt this sleep cycle, then your sleep quality is not going to be as good. And the quality is just as important as the quantity, because you can be sleeping a lot, and if it's not good sleep, then it won't be as effective.
Right. So if we're going to look at how much we should be sleeping, it's going to vary person to person as well as by your age. So for most of us who are over 18, we're going to be aiming for 7 to 9 hours a night. And if we think back to, the stereotypical teenager who sleeps all day, they need a little bit more, 8 to 10. And then even younger children will need more than that, 9 to 11. And those of you with newborns who are sleeping 12 plus hours a day, we see we need consistently less the older that we get. But some flaws with the way that these numbers came about, they were based off of an inactive population. And so something that we do need to consider as strength athletes is that the more active you are, the more your recovery needs will increase. And so if the main way that we're recovering is by sleeping, these numbers might be a little bit on the lower side. So if we're in a really stressful block, if we're peaking for a meet or experiencing a lot of stressors in other areas of our life, these can move up so that we need a little bit more sleep in order to adequately recover from all the stressors that we're applying to our body and our lifestyle.
So sleep debt is something that happens when you're not sleeping enough, and we're going to talk about a lot of the consequences of that. But it's important to note that this sleep debt can occur over one night, or you can kind of slowly build this sleep debt over time. So if you're constantly just kind of missing a little bit of sleep here and there, maybe a half an hour here, half an hour there, that does add up over time, especially So you want to make sure that you're getting that consistent sleep schedule. That's something we're going to talk about over and over and over again today, is consistency and creating habits and consistency with your sleep schedule. So that sleep debt can build up over time, or it can happen all at once. You pull an all-nighter one night, it's very hard to recover from that. So what we're going to start to look at is the effects of sleep deprivation and how they have pretty widespread effects that are going to affect pretty much every part of our life. And there is, obviously more than just lifestyle habits when it comes into sleep, but we aren't going to dive into sleep disorders or any of that, because that is definitely outside of our realm. But we're going to talk about the lifestyle habits that you can start to instill in your life to help as much as possible. So we're talking about negative effects. We don't want to spend too much time here because we could literally spend hours and hours talking about the negative effects of sleep deprivation. So we're just going to kind of glance over some of the big ones and talk about them a little bit. And we'll get into a little more depth about certain topics. But there's some great books out there that are literally like a whole book dedicated to the negative effects of sleep deprivation. So if you want to read more about that, you can read Why We Sleep by somebody that I forget. But it's a good one, and it'll kind of go into all of this stuff with specific studies, and there's some pretty kind of scary information out there about what happens when we are sleep deprived. So the biggest one, put it first because we're obviously all strength athletes, is reduced exercise performance. It's in the chat. Matt Walker. Thanks, Emily. And yeah, so Matt Walker is the author of Why We Sleep. And we have that reduced exercise performance, and that's a big one for us. And this is pretty much in every aspect of exercise performance. So we're going to see a decrease in maximal and submaximal strength. We're going to see a decrease in time to exhaustion, meaning we can't perform as much exercise before we get tired. We're going to see a decrease in our ability to perform work, whether that be strength work, power work, or whatever. Our ability to perform maximally will be detrimented. That goes to sprint speeds, cardiovascular measures, reaction times. And a super interesting one is perceived pain that I think comes up a little bit later. So you're going to be way more sensitive to pain when you are sleep deprived, which is going to play a huge role in exercise performance and recovery. And then furthermore, in terms of recovery, you're going to have an increased catabolic state, which is the muscle wasting state. So you're not going to be in a prime environment to build muscle, and your body is going to actually prefer a more muscle wasting state when you're sleep deprived. So again, as strength athletes, that's something we're going to want to perform. We're going to want to avoid at all costs. Another big one, big hitter, is decreased mood and performance. So outside of the weight room, your performance is going to be detrimented as well. So you're not going to be able to perform everyday tasks as efficiently as you would if you were fully rested. And this creates, that lack of productivity where you start to feel like you have too much stuff to do in the day, and then you actually end up losing more sleep because you have to work longer to get the same amount of work done, and it creates a vicious cycle where your detrimented performance leads to, more lack of sleep, which leads to more detrimented performance. And then from a mood standpoint, we see a big decrease in mood and increase in a rate of depression in people that are sleep deprived. And I think anyone who has had just one bad night's sleep can attest to that drop in mood the next day. And when that starts to compound over time, we can get ourselves into some sticky situations. And then the last thing we'll talk about in a little more detailed is You have some hormonal changes. We have an increase in blood cortisol, which is actually linked to a lot of the stuff we're talking about. And we have a decrease in growth hormone. And as lifters, growth hormone is definitely something that we are going to want to be aware of. So I put in this image because I like the guy getting jacked, little skinny guy. So growth hormone is definitely a big driver of pretty much everything that we are after in the gym, right? Leaner, more muscles, increased bone growth. Those are literally three of the biggest things we're after when we train. And growth hormone is highest when you are sleeping. So you want to make sure that you are sleeping so that your body has that chance to release growth hormone and all the other fun hormones that are going to aid in muscle growth.
Yeah, so just to touch on growth hormone really quick too, I think it's important to highlight that growth hormone is a really important fuel mobilizer. I know Layne Norton talks about this a lot. So we might see increases in growth hormone as a response to lifting weights. And that's, again, because growth hormone functions to mobilize whatever energy source that our body is prioritizing at that time. So I just think that's a really cool function of growth hormone that most people aren't aware of. So we can go back to the next slide.
Growth hormone is a super powerful hormone. I mean, even so that, people supplement with it, and it's on the banned substance list. So that would be one of the performance enhancing drugs that people take. So if we can maximize our natural growth hormone levels, that will be beneficial.
Yeah, so to continue on with some of the negative effects of sleep deprivation, we have an increased risk of obesity. This is thought to be a result of a lot of different factors. One of the big ones we'll get into a little bit later in more depth, but is changes to our hunger hormones. So we'll get into what those hormones are, their function in the body, and some of the consequences that lack of sleep will have on them. We're also going to see a dampened thyroid function. Again, this is going to have an effect on our body weight as a result of a lot of different factors. One of them being our basal metabolic rate, so how many calories our body is expending just to keep the lights on, so to speak. And then we'll also see less regulation of our blood sugar. So when we eat, our blood sugar goes up. Insulin's role is to bring it back down. If our blood sugar gets too low, glucagon is going to be released, which will bring our blood sugar back up. And so what we're constantly looking to do is maintain homeostasis and keep our blood sugar levels relatively constant. And there will be instances where we want it maybe higher or lower, but our ability to regulate this is something that is decreased as we lose sleep. And all of these can play together to create more abdominal fat. So if that's going to be a goal of ours, to change the amount of abdominal fat that we have, sleep is going to affect this in a multitude of ways. And I've already touched on the increased levels of hunger again. So I talked about hunger hormones being affected by lack of sleep, but it's in a way that's going to make us feel more hungry, and we will likely overconsume calories. So you guys can start to get an idea of how all of these factors can play together to work against us if our goal is to lose body fat and perform, if we're not getting enough sleep. And like Paul had mentioned, with cortisol being a stress hormone and growth hormone being an anabolic hormone, if stress hormones are working to, in a very simple term, like break things down, and then anabolic hormones are working to build things back up, our body has a very precise amount of each one that it wants, again called homeostasis, where sort of everything is balanced. And this lack of sleep is going to tip our balance towards something that will be detrimental for all of the other performance and body composition and cognitive functions that we're looking to maximize. So again, it's just really important to make sure that we're giving our body what it needs in order to perform at the highest level.
Yeah, and then another point there with the abdominal fat is abdominal fat specifically is linked with a lot of cardiovascular diseases, and there's been a lot of research showing that abdominal fat, when you look it up, they call it visceral fat, is related to a lot of the negative health consequences. And then there's additional studies that show that decreased or sleep deprivation, increases fat storage in that area specifically. So we're really looking at, really the most negative parts of waking here as well. So something that I talked about a little bit in the performance part, but for anyone that knows me, knows that I obviously find this very interesting, is when you are sleep deprived, you have a decreased pain tolerance and increased perceived pain. So things that normally wouldn't feel painful now feel painful. And then tasks that you would normally be able to perform without pain are now causing pain. And when you have increased pain, you have disrupt sleep. So if you're in pain, if anyone has ever been in a lot of pain, that it's hard to sleep, and then your sleep quality goes down, and then you're in more pain. So again, a lot of these problems create these vicious circles, and we need to like nip them in the bud before they become a huge problem. So some other negative effects of sleep, these all seem to be kind of related to cortisol that we'll talk about next, but is a weakened immune system, especially right now. That's super important, is that we have strong immune systems. So making sure that you get enough sleep so that your immune system can operate fully and functionally. Decreased bone density. This is huge, especially for all the women out there where osteoporosis is running rampant. One of the main benefits of strength training is increased bone density, but if we're not sleeping enough, that doesn't always happen. And then these next two are actually related with elevated blood pressure and increased chances of heart disease, which might be related to that cortisol that we're going to talk about next. Well, actually, this is your slide, Ryan. I added it in for you.
All right. So if we think of the time that we're awake as time that we're inputting stress into our body from any different source, when we're sleeping is when I hate to use the word cleanse because it has such a negative effect, right? But we're reducing the negative effects of that stress on our body. And if we're consistently not sleeping, those will add up. So when we're sleeping, some of the major changes that we notice in our brain function, we're replenishing neurotransmitters that may become depleted throughout the day, or we may not have as many of them. We're going to aid memory function or memory formation. So if you're constantly sleep deprived as a student and you're trying to cram for tests, your performance is going to be worse relative to if you had prioritized sleep, which would aid in that memory formation and then that memory recall when it comes time to take the test. And then when we're sleeping, we're also solidifying skill acquisition. So this can be really important for an athlete trying to learn a new skill or a new movement or hone a new movement pattern. When we're sleeping, we're really solidifying everything that we had practiced throughout that day, throughout the previous training session, or performance or sport. And so this just all ties back into this all ties back into improving our performance and performing at a high skill level consistently. So if somebody is struggling with consistency, sleep could be a very big factor in that. And there's a lot of factors that are going to affect the consistency and quality of your sleep. So we want to seek to control those as much as we can. And then the last one, we do see a very strong link between Alzheimer's and a lack of sleep or chronic sleep deprivation. So again, making sure that we're prioritizing sleep can just go a really long way in ensuring that our body's performing as optimally as possible for as long as possible.
Yeah, so the thing that always made this stick in my head and why I came with the sleep is your cleaning crew title is when you sleep, when your building closes at night, if you own a business or a school, there's a janitorial crew that comes in, cleans everything up, and makes sure that it's ready to go for the next day. And sleep is like that cleaning crew or your janitorial staff for your body. It just kind of, starts to push things into that recovery standpoint so that you can wake up the next day ready to go. So that metaphor just always stuck in my head. On to cortisol. So cortisol is something that I think probably everyone's heard of. It's super hot topic and when people talk about health, and it's often, called the stress hormone, not caused. And it is necessary to function. We do want cortisol. We don't want to eliminate it completely, but when it's constantly elevated, it may cause problems. So when we talked about, stress management and relaxation and sleeping in the recovery seminar, this was one of, the areas that we are focusing on. So cortisol has widespread effects throughout the body. It regulates many of the changes that happen in the body due to stress. So as Ryan said, if you think about kind of the stress response as breaking stuff down so you can mobilize and use that as energy, and then that anabolic state being more what we're after, where we're building up and getting, stronger or more muscles. So it regulates this on many different levels throughout our body, from blood sugar levels, from fat, protein, carb metabolism, our immune response, anti-inflammatory actions, our blood pressure, which is controlled by our heart and blood vessel tone and contraction, and central nervous activation. So as we kind of go through this, you'll kind of see how this has a lot of effects on a lot of those negative effects that we talked about when it comes to sleep. So again, this is kind of just going on again what we were just went through is if cortisol is controlling these different things, blood sugar, immune response, blood pressure, when you have constantly high levels of cortisol, it has negative effects on a lot of those things because remember, we're in a catabolic state where mobilizing and breaking stuff down. So we're having a weakened immune system, decreased bone density, the mood, and we've had some links of chronically high levels of cortisol and depression, heart disease because of that high blood pressure, weight gain, and increased levels of hunger, which is what we're going to talk about more now.
All right, so ghrelin and leptin are the two hormones that we were talking about earlier when we had mentioned that lack of sleep is going to negatively influence your appetite. So ghrelin is a peptide that's going to stimulate hunger, and leptin is going to stimulate satiety or like fullness. So we're automatically, from not sleeping, feeling more hungry and less satisfied from our food, which can lead to overconsumption of calories. So shortened sleep time has been shown with decreases in leptin and increases in ghrelin. If we look at the visceral fat, like Paul talked about, that's why, like, if you see a guy who has like a really big pot belly or like a beer belly, that's visceral fat. What that is, that surrounds your organs. It's underneath the muscle, and it's the most dangerous spot to be storing fat. It's largely influenced by your genetics. So there's not so much that you can change there outside of some of these modifiable factors like alcohol consumption or sleep. But for the most part, there's a very large genetic component in where you store fat. And so the opposite of visceral fat would be like subcutaneous, so underneath your skin. That's what creates the more flabby look, right? That's why, like, if you have a lot of subcutaneous fat, your belly might be like squishier, whereas again, the visceral is firmer. So those are very important concepts to understand, or it's very important to be aware of the risks of storing fat in both of those ways. And something else that we see after not sleeping, we can see levels of blood sugar that are pre-diabetic and lack of control of that blood sugar. So again, we talked about this earlier, but this is how not sleeping is going to influence your blood sugar and your lack of regulation of it. And it's to such a degree that you are you could be classified as pre-diabetic. And again, insulin and blood sugar just being tied together and influenced negatively by a lack of sleep.
Yeah, so I, th- I threw in a couple random studies here, but there was one with sleep deprivation. They made them not pretty much sleep all night. They had some minuscule amount of sleep, but their blood sugar levels kind of were at that pre-diabetic stage just after one night of not sleeping. Then there was this one here with 1,000 participants, and when their sleep went from 8 hours to 5 hours, they saw a 3.6% increase in body mass index, and then that leptin and ghrelin that Ryan was talking about. So another big thing that kind of affects all of this is motivation and impaired cognitive function, and that sleepiness and that whole positive feedback loop that occurs because of that I kind of touched on a little bit earlier, was just even a moderate sleep deprivation produces impairments in cognitive and motor performance equivalent to being legally drunk. So there's been some studies showing that as little as 12 hours of missed sleep is equivalent to being intoxicated over the legal driving limit. So if you can imagine kind of living life that way, it wouldn't be the most efficient way to live. So and sometimes people are in this state all the time and they just get so used to it that they don't know what like fully functioning feels like anymore. So a lot of times people are like, no, I don't feel drunk, and that's not me. I can get over with sleeping 4 hours. Like I feel great. But that's just because you don't know what it actually feels like to be well rested, because you're constantly sleep deprived. So another scary kind of study that we looked at was there was a estimated 30% of automobile crashes are attributed to fatigue, and those that sleep less than 6 hours a night were 22% more likely to get in an accident. So if you're not as cognitively sharp, you're not as motorily sharp, you are not being able to do as much during the day and get as much done, and then you have to be awake longer to get the same amount of stuff done, and then you are not going to sleep as well because you're all stressed out about all the things you have to do. So again, it creates this positive feedback loop. And then as your motivation fades, everybody knows when they're sleepy, their motivation is not there. When your motivation fades, so does your daily routine. And what we're going to be talking about today is how that routine is the most important thing you can be doing to get the best night's sleep possible. So this is my PowerPoint drawing skills. So cycle of inaction, right? No action, no results, no motivation. It's a vicious circle there. And this one was about fear and failure, but it could be because you're too sleepy too. So this is where we want to spend the meat of our time. And again, we'll probably ask you to be a little bit interactive with some of these parts and see how you guys are doing with sleep habits and sleep routine. So the number one thing that we're going to be talking about, we're going to repeat it over and over again until it's drilled into your head, is that you need to make sleep a priority. Sleep quotas are biologically fixed, and there's no more shame in needing 9 hours of sleep than needing a size 9 shoe. All right. So our society has made it kind of like cool to brag about how much we work and how little we sleep. Hashtag no days off. So it's something that almost needs to change as a whole society, where it really should be cool to, sleep 7 to 9 hours, not to be staying up all night and partying or working. Again, as we said before, if you're not sleeping, your work isn't as productive anyways. And, you know, after a certain point in time and after a certain amount of work, the work you're doing just isn't efficient anymore. So it's more about how efficient you can be with your work than how much work you can do. If you can get the same amount of stuff done in 3 hours that it takes someone 12 hours to do, I'm taking the person that does it in 3 hours all day long. So it's not, I don't know, it's not cool to not sleep. So we need to make sleep a priority, and that's the number one thing. All right.
So, like we had talked about, Paul mentioned efficiency, right? If it takes you 3 hours to do all the tasks that it takes somebody else to complete in 12 hours, ideally we'd want to be doing the more efficient route and finishing everything in 3. And so sleep is no different. We want to get enough sleep, but we also want it to be quality. And so everything that's in these bullet points is going to factor into having quality sleep. And there are a lot of things that we can do to help ensure that this happens. And so the first one would be making sure that we have a regular sleep schedule, and also possibly having a pre-bed ritual or routine that becomes a part of that will aid in your falling asleep process. There we go, got the slide. So we had mentioned all the benefits of that, from the hormonal changes, the cognitive changes, and performance changes that'll get you at an optimal level. And all of these will factor into also helping you get a good night's sleep. So within that consistent routine, we want to make sure that we're doing the same thing every night. We want to make sure that we have habits. So this could look like reducing screen time as it gets closer and closer to bed, reducing the brightness of the room that we're in. Reading could be a part of a routine for someone, but not somebody else, right? It could be too stimulating and wake one person up, but help another fall asleep. So there's going to be a lot of variations in this. What we do see is that our circadian rhythm, so our internal clock or our internal hormonal cycle that regulates our sleep, our wake cycles, and our performance, we want to make sure that when we are going through periods of like sleep and wakefulness, that it's consistent. And so what this would look like is ideally is going to bed around the same time every night, as well as waking up around the same time. So if we think of work week versus weekends, somebody who's training with us might get up for the gym at 5 a.m. every single day during the week, and then sleep until 8 o'clock on the weekend. That's a 3-hour shift. So every week you're throwing off your circadian rhythm by 3 hours for 2 of the 7 days of the week. And that has consequences. It does take our body time to adjust. And even if we go to the extreme, right, that's a very rigid example of somebody who's disciplined enough to get to the gym at 5 a.m. every day of the week. If we think of maybe a college student who might sleep 3 hours on the weekends and is up at all hours of the night studying, but has very early classes and will sporadically take naps throughout the day, that is just absolute chaos for their circadian rhythm. And so again, if performance in any aspect of your life is a goal of yours, trying to create more consistency across the board with your circadian rhythm and your sleep cycle is going to pay dividends. So again, just a few more things that we could add into our routine to make that more consistent. We talked about turning lights on and off. We talked about, or one of the other things that we can change is following the same path for whatever 45 minutes a night or an hour before bed, so that it almost is ingrained in us that, okay, this is now our sleep time. So using the bedroom for sleep only, not keeping electronics on in the bed, reducing levels of noise that are surrounding our bedroom or surrounding us in the house or wherever we live is going to go a long way. If we're struggling to do that, something like a white noise machine could go a long way in helping us reduce the difference between the sounds that we're hearing and maybe startling or sudden noises, so that they have less of an effect on us as we're trying to fall asleep or as we try and stay asleep. And then, yeah, so on the slides we see we can have a period of winding down before we sleep and try and de-stress, and that's just helping our parasympathetic nervous system take over versus our sympathetic. So the easiest way to describe these two, if we see on the left, it's sort of a rest and digest type nervous system where we are winding down. It is sort of a recovery mode, whereas our sympathetic nervous system is going to be our fight or flight. It's going to get us ready to perform. And what we see is a lot of the highest level performers in their specific sport or area, they are really, really good at dictating which of these states that they're in. So they're able to hit really, really high peaks with their sympathetic nervous system and getting fired up and ready to perform, as well as being very, very good at being able to wind down, not stay at a chronically elevated heart rate or intensity level. They can calm themselves, they can recover, they can fall asleep. And so just consistently practicing how we're feeling and being mindful of what state we're in can go a long way in helping us improve our ability to utilize both of these systems, because they are both very important. What we don't want to see really is sort of a even across the board type person where they can't really get fired up, but they also can't really relax. That's sort of the worst spot for us to be in. All right.
You already talked about all this stuff.
Yeah.
Just a few notes on kind of some thoughts that I had while he was talking. Was one is we talked about the quality and versus the quantity of sleep, and making sure that we're getting a full night's sleep and that we're sleeping soundly through the night, not waking up too much, that we're completing those full sleep cycles, and the difference between trouble falling asleep and staying asleep, and how the things we're going to talk about today not only are going to help you fall asleep, but will help you stay asleep and have a more restful sleep. And then I wanted to just make a side note on sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is something that can greatly affect the quality of your sleep. We're not going to go too far into this, but if you're finding yourself like drifting off during the day, often during mundane tasks such as reading or driving, watching TV, talking to someone, eating, and you find yourself kind of dozing off, you might want to go to your doctors and get screened for sleep apnea, because that can have a lot of negative health effects as well. And then we want to make sure that we're actually doing enough during the day to be tired at the end of the day. If you're not doing anything and you're sitting on your butt all day, chances are you're going to have trouble falling asleep just because you're not tired. You haven't physically exerted yourself. So we're going to make sure that we're moving every day, that we're exerting ourselves physically and mentally, and that we're being productive every day, so that when it becomes time to sleep, we are ready to sleep and we want to sleep. I forget who said it. Probably, I think Kyle Dobbs on Instagram said, I don't think I've ever seen a farmer have trouble falling asleep. At the end of a hard day of work, pretty much everyone can fall asleep. Are you agreeing with me, Christine? Consistency, I want to harp on that again. That means doing the same thing every night, going to bed at the same time every night, waking up at the same time every day. All right, so this is the main theme today, is creating that consistency so that you can create those habits. And like Ryan said, you want to let your body know it's time for sleep. And when you do the same thing every night, your body creates that habit of this is sleep time, and then you become sleepy, and all the things that need to happen in your body to become more sleepy and ready for rest happen. So we need to trigger that by creating that consistency. Naps are a great option. If you have the time to sleep in, you're like, man, it's the weekend, I have, an extra hour to sleep today. Like, wake up at the same time and take a nap later in the day so that you can keep that consistency in your schedule. Yeah, so he was talking about some relaxation. We'll go into more of these. 1 to 2 hours of relaxation before bed is recommended. I understand that's a lot. So start small and work your way up. Start with maybe 10 minutes before bed, work your way to 20, 30 minutes. Maybe you only need 30 minutes to get fully wind down and go to bed, and that's what you find. Start small, work your way up. Ryan mentioned minimizing stressors, minimizing screen time, minimizing light. We're going to talk about that more. I did want to talk a little bit about kind of some things you can do to promote relaxation. We're going to talk about lights off in the next couple of slides. And we want to find some activities that we can do with minimal lighting that last 20 to 30 minutes before bed and kind of get us into that restful state. Whether that be meditation or deep breathing, there's mindfulness activities. Emily recommended, she's a sleep scientist, recommended progressive muscle relaxation, bubble baths, anything that you find relaxing. You can, have a conversation with your partner, put your phone down, and everyone talks, hey, I never get to talk to my partner. We're always busy. Spend that 30 minutes before bed talking to your partner and relaxing. It's good. This is going to be different for everybody. So try to find something that works for you. And then again, Ryan kind of touched on all this stuff too, but we'll go into a little more details and have it written down for you. But you want to make sure your room is a safe haven from stress. You don't want anything stressful in your room. You want it to be, every time you walk into your room, you should feel relaxed. So you want to keep work and everyday life stressors out. And that includes so much as just having work laying around. Make sure everything's cleaned and organized and put away. You should have a pretty minimalistic looking room. You should only be using your bed for the 2 S's, sleep and no, not snacks. The other S. Then you want to keep things clean and clutter-free. So want to get rid of clutter, keep it clean, arrange furniture that's in the way that's visually pleasing to you. No snacks in bed, Kelsey. Snacks are very important, but not in bed. Just sleep and sex. Choose paints, colors, artworks that you find soothing, and then try to eliminate anything that could wake you up at night, whether that be your phone or anything that has lights or sounds, covering anything that emits light, whether that be just kind of taping over if you have like a air purifier or something with the on light that lightens up your room. Maybe it's covering that, trying to, I guess ideally we would eliminate all electronics from our room, but that's not always practical. We'll talk about kind of some ideal versus practical a little later too. Another big one is pets. A lot of people have pets that sleep with them, which is cool if it doesn't affect your sleep. But unfortunately, a lot of times those pets do affect your sleep. So training them to sleep elsewhere is a huge thing. We have a vet that we trained, Tracy, who built her dog a kind of dog bed on the foot of her bed. So the dog could still sleep with her, but she could not be woken up in the middle of the night by the dog. So creating some sort of situation where the pet is not waking up in the middle of the night. I got 2 dogs, not allowed in the bed.
Can't keep you up. Take it over.
Yeah. You want a cool, dark environment. The ideal sleeping temperature is around 65 degrees. You want it to be a little cold so that you need your blanket. I don't know how some of you crazy people sleep with the heat on, but you need to be, again, this is individual, but in general, it's around 65 degrees. Sound, Ryan also touched on this, but while you sleep, your brain continues to register and process sounds on a basic level. So noises can affect your sleep without you even realizing. And it can actually shift you between different stages of sleep or experience changes in blood pressure or heart rate so briefly that you don't remember, but it does affect your sleep. So try to eliminate noises and maybe make use of a white noise. By having that kind of constant ambient noise, you dull out the peaks in other noises. So things like doors slamming or cars driving by are less likely to disrupt you.
All right, so I also had mentioned that light is something that we should be concerned about. So our internal clock, circadian rhythm that we talked about, is going to influence a lot of our internal functions. If we can regulate it consistently, we can help our body uh, become more awake and primed to be productive, like we talked about throughout the day. And then we can also try and create an environment where we feel more tired and ready to sleep when we should be. And this is largely influenced by melatonin. Melatonin is going to be influenced by light. So we want to make sure that we're keeping ourselves in a darker environment so that we produce melatonin and end up falling asleep. It's going to aid in our quality and quantity of sleep. And so it's negatively affected by light surrounding us. If we're in a bright room, we're not going to be producing as much, and it's going to impede our ability to sleep. So again, if possible, we can build into this. We don't have to start with an hour right away, but it is important to work towards spending more time free of artificial light as we're getting closer to our bedtime and performing a relaxing activity in that space. So again, what's ideal versus what's practical? So ideally, we have no electronics in the room. So, this can be hard if somebody has a significant other who sleeps with the TV on. Like, oh, I've always fell asleep with noise. I can't fall asleep without it. But it is having a negative effect on the quality and quantity of your sleep. There's a suggestion to use candlelight instead of the artificial bright light. And then something else we can do is limit our phone time. This is something I've been guilty of. I can remember an instance where I checked my email at like 8:30 at night, and there's something in there that I didn't want to read, and I got absolutely fired up and just didn't sleep that night. So if whatever we're going to do can wait until the next day, it's probably ideal that we just leave it if it's not absolutely critical. We want to be careful about, again, the stressors that we're exposing ourselves to as we're trying to unwind and sleep. And something that can go a long way in helping you create that environment is something like a blackout shade that's going to reduce artificial light from outside. Especially if you're in a city where sort of the lights are always on. And even if we're not following the ideal scenario, we can start to do things like turning our phone on silent or using blue light or like a nighttime filter on your phone. That's going to reduce the amount of blue light that your phone is putting out, which will hopefully not impede your melatonin production as much and help you fall asleep. We can start to use other lighting sources like flux or twilight or amber colored light bulbs, things that aren't going to be as harsh or as bright, which will hopefully have less of an effect on impeding our ability to fall asleep. And something that isn't necessarily the most supported right now, but it might be useful, is blue light blocking glasses. There's a thought that those can filter out some of the blue light from your room or your screen that's in front of you. And then sort of the blackout shades for your eyeballs. You can toss a sleep mask on, which would obviously block out all light from reaching your eyeballs and keeping you awake.
Yeah, so some cool stuff there. Flux is a program that you can do the same thing that your iPhone that kind of does it automatically, where it changes the colors at night so they're not as harsh on your eyes. There's a app on your computer that does the same thing, Flux. Amber color light bulbs are said to reduce blue light. They have the blue blocking sunglasses, which all of this stuff with the blue light has like mixed research on it, whether or not it works. But there's a pretty low barrier to implementing these things. They all are free or cost a couple dollars. So in my brain with these kind of things is, it's better than nothing, but we're kind of trying to work towards we're trying to kind of work towards those ideals, but obviously those ideals aren't very practical for a lot of people and the lives they live. But by maybe starting with 20 minutes and working our way up to an hour, we can kind of get used to doing some of this stuff. Another kind of side point is people that have weird schedules, shift workers, nurses, firefighters. Obviously, a lot of the stuff we talked about today is hard, and it's not, again, not quite practical. Big thing for people that need to sleep during the day is definitely making use of those sleep mask and blackout shades, and making sure that their room is cool and dark when they're sleeping, even if that is during the day. Ryan also mentioned people in the city. That's another great example there. And then the other thing is to still try and create a consistent schedule, whatever that might look like for you. It might not be your typical sleeping from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. It might be something different depending on your schedule, but whatever it is, try to make it consistent. And if it's not possible to get good sleep every night, say you're a firefighter that works 24-hour shifts, focus on the whole week and making sure that, over the course of the 7 days, you average about 8 hours of sleep a night, and that you're coming in, again, with a consistent schedule. So it's not ideal, but it's your job and your livelihood. So you got to make it work. And there are ways to make that work. And most of it revolves around creating that consistent schedule and creating that routine before bed, whatever time it is that you're going to bed.
I would put personal trainers or strength coaches on that list of shift workers or weird hours too, right?
Yeah. So like we're at the gym at 5 a.m. and we're usually done coaching around between 9 a.m. and noon. And then we're back at the gym at 3. And then we don't leave till 8, 9 o'clock at night. So it's literally physically impossible to sleep 8 hours at one clip. But we do implement naps to try and help, and we still try to create, some sort of consistent schedule, even though it's not consistent throughout every day. It's consistent week to week. And it's not perfect. Yeah, super bright lights. Yeah, that's true.
Like we're at the dentist, dude.
Yeah. The super bright lights at night, 8 p.m. when we're trying to go home and go to bed. It's almost impossible to fall asleep right away. So we're still trying to create a consistent schedule from week to week. And I can tell you, obviously, with everything going on now, and now that I am in a day-to-day consistent schedule, I feel a ton better sleep-wise, and dealing with sleepiness and fatigue and all of that. Even though I was doing I probably was better about everything when I was working crazy hours and waking up and having to wake up and go to bed at different hours. I was probably way better at my pre-bed routine and avoiding light and all of that stuff, but it still didn't make up for the fact that my schedule was crazy with the sleep. So while it's not ideal, it's not perfect, we can still make the most of it by using all the techniques we talked about today. So next thing we're talking about, caffeine and alcohol. I know it's supposed to be me, but you can talk, Ryan.
All right. Yeah, we got a little crisscross and started talking with each other's notes. So we got caffeine. We take in caffeine from a lot of different sources. Probably the most popular one being coffee, but energy drinks or pre-workouts also contain quite a bit of caffeine, as well as other components of the drink that enhance the effects of them. So, yeah, when I see somebody strolling at the gym at 7, 8 o'clock at night with a bang in their hand, ready to go, it's probably not ideal for their sleep. So what is caffeine? It is a central nervous stimulant. And what it does is it prevents the onset of drowsiness. So it blocks those feelings of us being tired. It doesn't remove them. And this acts on our sympathetic nervous system. So before, when we talked about parasympathetic versus sympathetic, we talked about rest and digest versus sort of like fight or flight. So sympathetic being that fight or flight, that's going to be very important in exercise and performing physically. And caffeine has a long half-life. So if we think of half-life as how long it takes for our body to process half of the amount of caffeine that we ingest, we're looking at about 5 to 6 hours. So what that means, do some math on the spot, right? So if we have, let's say, 200 milligrams in a cup of coffee that we take in at 3 p.m. and you have a 6-hour half-life, you still have 100 milligrams of caffeine coursing through your veins at 9 o'clock when you're trying to sleep. And you have 50 milligrams still coursing through your veins at 3 in the morning when you're supposed to be getting very restful sleep. And caffeine is very disruptive to our sleep. So caffeine that we have 8 to 14 hours before we're trying to sleep, or even trying to be in like deep stages of sleep, is going to have an effect on the quality and quantity of our sleep. So some things that we can do to try and eliminate the negative effects of caffeine on our sleep, right? Because there's a lot of positives to caffeine. It's the most widely used psychoactive drug in the world, but it's also, like I keep saying, negative when it comes to affecting our sleep. So we can avoid caffeine after noon. We could try some decaf if we still want to have that taste of coffee in the afternoon, or you could go like half and half decaf, half regular. And again, this is hopefully, if we can adjust our intake, going to have a net positive effect both on our sleep and our effectiveness throughout the day, or our efficiency, right? So a lot of people keep constantly saying they need caffeine in order to be productive. They need caffeine to get through their workouts. They need caffeine to deal with, you know, their kids and their family and get everything done throughout the day. But like everything that we keep talking about, and Paul has alluded to this earlier more than once, is we just see this feedback loop where, you know, it's okay, I had a bad night's sleep, so I need caffeine to get through my day. And then you have caffeine to get through your day, so you have another bad night's sleep because you had it too close to bedtime. And it just creates this cycle where you're not getting restful sleep, so you're not getting back to sort of your most optimal state to be efficient. And then you use caffeine again as a crutch to make up for that, and you can't break this cycle without feeling really, really crappy for maybe a few days or a week. So you could take alcohol. I took caffeine.
Yeah. So the next is alcohol. Alcohol has, I mean, even outside of sleep, disrupts hormones and has negative effects when it comes to performance, but it also negatively affects sleep. And it's funny because a lot of people use alcohol to help them get to sleep. And they'll say, hey, you know, I need my shot of whiskey at night to get to bed. It helps me fall asleep. And while that might be true, it might help you fall asleep faster. It does severely impact the quality of your sleep. And it limits the amount of REM sleep we get, which is arguably one of the most important stages of sleep, depending on who you talk to. And then it also disrupts your hormones and all those other negative aspects of alcohol that happen the next day, and being hungover and being less productive and feeding into this, again, lack of productivity, needing to be awake longer, lack of sleep feedback loop that we're trying to avoid. So try to limit your alcoholic drinks, especially very close to bed. If you have a few drinks, try to have them with dinner and then have that time to kind of sober up a little bit before you go to bed. Try not to use alcohol as a nightcap to fall asleep. Again, moderation. Obviously, alcohol is part of a lot of people's lives. We're not asking you to give up alcohol, but we are asking you to moderate your alcohol intake. And then supplements. There's millions and trillions of supplements out there that are supposed to help you sleep, but there's not much research on any of them that looks very good, besides using melatonin after long travel to deal with jet lag and to kind of help reset your circadian rhythm with the time changes. But outside of that, melatonin doesn't seem to have an effect on a normal, healthy person's sleep. ZMA is also another popular sleep supplement, which also doesn't seem to have much effect unless the person is deficient in magnesium, which is a common deficiency, but you'd have to go to your doctor and get checked. again, something out of our realm. But there's no shortcut here. That's what we're saying. There's no magic pill. There's nothing you can do to just, get a good night's sleep without putting in the work. There's medications that people use to help them sleep, but those come with their handful of side effects. The best way to do it is to create that consistent schedule, create that pre-bed routine, and do it.
Yeah, just before we move on, and you mentioned jet lag, just as a cool little story, I know, like both Paul and I went to UConn, and so one of the big studies that went on at UConn while I was there was a study on jet lag and performance. If we think of athletes who are constantly traveling all around the country and the world to compete, that is a stressor that could create an advantage for one of the participants or the teams who might not have to travel as much. And so what this study was, or how it was conducted, was we flew 30 people out to California and did a whole bunch of tests, a whole bunch of blood work, a lot of performance testing, just to see how much they were affected by the stressor of a cross-country flight. And at this point, I don't remember all of the numbers, but I can double check. But I want to say it was something around like 1 hour of a time change. It takes approximately like 24 to 36 hours for your body to adjust. So if we look at a 3-hour time difference, if somebody from the East Coast is competing out in California, it can be several days before that person's circadian rhythm has adjusted to the new time zone. And that can have really severe effects on their performance. But a lot of you guys travel for work too. So if a lot of you guys are flying all around the country every week or every other week, this can have pretty serious consequences or serious effects. And we might not necessarily be able to change them, but we can deal with the stressors as best we can, as long as we're well informed and aware of what our options are to help deal with a lot of these different time zone changes and stressors of flying and excess travel.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, even with that, keeping your routine, keeping your bedtime, all important things to maximizing the efficiency there. And then that would be the one time you'd want to supplement with melatonin on those nights that you just cross time zones. So some other just kind of general sleep tips is that try keeping a thought journal next to your bed. A lot of people complain about not being able to fall asleep because their mind is racing with all these thoughts or things they have to do the next day. If you have something next to your bed where you can just jot down the things you're thinking and know that they'll be there the next day when you wake up, that can be very helpful, especially if you're someone that wakes up in the middle of the night with a racing mind. I know a lot of people say, hey, I fall asleep fine, but 2:00 comes and I wake up and I just can't stop thinking about all the things I have to do the next day. Write them down and tell yourself like, hey, they're going to be there the next day. They'll be there when I wake up. And that can be helpful. We talked about this earlier, but experiment with different relaxation techniques until you find one that suits your personality and that works with you. For me, that's just deep breathing. If I can't fall asleep, I focus on my breath, and before I know it, I'm, out. Whether there's people that practice like progressive muscle relaxation, where you're kind of squeezing a muscle and then relaxing it, squeezing a muscle and relaxing it until you get through your whole body, stuff like that. There's guided meditations online. There's all sorts of things. All those apps, Calm and Headspace, in them have sleep type meditations. So there's plenty of options there. You just got to play around with it and find something that works for you. And another thing is, if you don't fall asleep within 20 minutes of trying, you probably want to get up, do something else, and then try again, because as I'm sure all of you have experienced, after about that 20-minute mark, you start to just get pissed off that you're not falling asleep, and then you get all worked up that you can't fall asleep, and it turns into one of those positive feedback loops that we're trying to avoid, where all you're thinking about is trying to fall asleep, and you can't fall asleep because all you're thinking about is trying to fall asleep, and it makes you stressed out. So you have any other random tips?
what helped me the most is really just deciding the urgency of whatever it was that I was considering doing at night. Is it something that can wait till tomorrow? Whether it's answering an email or writing a program or whatever. And then being conscious of just what time it is. I think it's really easy for time to get lost if you're watching another episode of a Netflix show or, browsing your phone. So potentially setting an alarm to remind you, like, okay, now it's time for me to start to unwind. Because again, I find it's pretty easy for me to lose track of time if I'm not paying attention to it.
And speaking of Netflix, I know a lot of people like to kind of watch TV before they fall asleep, which is fine as long as you're turning it off within a reasonable time and getting to bed to have that hour or so of relaxation, 30 minutes of relaxation at the end. But when you are choosing TV shows at night, it's like, don't choose shows that are going to keep you up. Like if you're going to watch, the season finale of Ozark and be all hyped up, like the rest of the night, like maybe watch it at a different time, maybe choose a show that is funny or relaxing. Like let's not watch a show where 25 people just got murdered and whatever else. Like
the world is ending.
Yeah.
Go to Planet Earth or something. Yeah, that's a good one too.
So let's kind of talk about this is some ideas for pre-bed routine. So this is kind of a so Emily said your sympathetic nervous system actually gets activated the same as if you were in a scary situation. So when you're watching scary shows, you get that same sympathetic response. And, we've talked about that before is we want to be parasympathetic to fall asleep, and being able to control whether we're in a more sympathetic or parasympathetic state is huge to falling asleep and huge in performance. We want to be able to turn it on when it's time to turn it on. We want to be sympathetic when we're working out or when we are doing something that requires maximal performance. But the rest of the day and when we're sleeping, we want to be as parasympathetic as possible because that is going to drive recovery. So no scary shows before bed, especially those jumpy scary shows. They just like randomly pop monsters out and scream so that like your heart rate goes through the roof. Like just
psychologically traumatizing.
Yeah. So this is my pre-bed routine right now. So this is my example. We'll kind of chat a little bit. I'll open up everyone from being muted and we can talk about some things that you guys do before bed and some ideas that you guys have. But this is mine personally right now. Is around 8 p.m. I'm trying to end any work or any stressful activities I'm doing, whether that be social media or any other work tasks or house chores that I have to do. From 8 to 8:30, we're going to watch some TV and wind down, again, being cognizant of our choices. Then 8:30 to 9, shower, brush teeth, general grooming, whatever you need to do before bed. Then you're going to bed and trying to relax for about an hour. The first 30 minutes of that is something about like reading a book or playing Pokemon has been the choice of late. And then 9:30, lights off. Then from 9:30 to 10, I like to practice saying some things that I'm grateful for at the end of the day, and then just being mindful of my breathing until I fall asleep. I've gotten out of the habit of, right now I don't have an alarm, so I'm just kind of waking up whenever, which happens to be 7 a.m. I do set an alarm for 7:30 just in case to make sure that I'm consistent, but I haven't made it to 7:30 yet. So waking up around 7. When I do have an alarm, I try to do more of a gradual wake up with slow lights on. There are some alarms that you can buy that kind of wake you up by emitting light into your room instead of having that harsh alarm wake up. Again, parasympathetic, sympathetic, waking up from an alarm and being in a heightened state right off the bat might not be the best for us. So I like the soft wake up of the alarm that emits light. We talked about not having phones in your room, and a lot of people use their phone as an alarm, and a lot of people have trouble getting up out of bed when their alarm goes off. So a good tip that I have found is to set your alarm on your phone and put it in a different room. This kills two birds with one stone. You now don't have your phone in your room while you're trying to fall asleep, which eliminates distractions and a lot of stressful situations, because social media is another stressful thing that gets a lot of people amped up before they're going to bed. They're browsing Facebook and they see Uncle Joe's political rant and they get all pissed off, and then they can't fall asleep. So it's another thing that you could, be eliminating before bed. And then having the alarm go off in another room makes you actually get up out of bed and keeps you from snoozing 25 times, which is another one of my pet peeves. Like, just set your alarm for the time you have to get up and wake up. Don't waste an hour of sleep that you could be getting quality sleep, getting crappy sleep because you want to snooze 8 times. So set your alarm and get up.
One snooze, that's it.
Every snooze you use is a wasted time that you could actually be sleeping. Like, if you set your alarm for 7:30 and you don't have to get up to 8 because you're going to snooze 5 times, like, you wasted a half an hour. It just makes no sense to me. All right, so Cliff Notes. Sleep is way more important than you think. It is the number one thing we can do for our health and performance. More than anything else, more than your diet, more than your training, more than anything, sleep is the most important thing you can do. And then when you add training into the mix, in order to make progress, you need to sleep, which is why it's more important than training. Because if you're training and not sleeping, it doesn't matter because you're not going to make any progress. So you're in your most anabolic state when you're sleeping, and the amount you have to sleep is biologically set. There's no fighting it. There's like something like 0.0001% of the population that can survive on less than the amount of sleep that is put out here. So don't trick yourself into trying to say that you're one of those people, because when rounded to the nearest whole number, there's a 0% chance you're that person. All right. And then we talked about creating that ideal sleep environment: cool, clean, soothing, getting that pre-bed routine, prioritizing relaxation, avoiding light, deep breathing, meditation, and avoiding caffeine and alcohol. This is a great article that Emily shared with us that kind of overviews all of this and shows all the science behind it, and has a lot of good references that you can look at if you are looking to dive more deep into this topic. So I will open everybody up. We can take questions. Do you have anything else, Ryan, before
There's a lot of sources that we have for everything that we just talked about. So if there's any topic that somebody found interesting or wants to read more about, just reach out and we can send you the citations for whatever that topic is so that you have more reading. And I'm sure.
All right. So I think everyone's unmuted now. So if you have any questions, feel free. If not, thank you for joining us. No questions, no questions.
South Korea's been sleeping their whole life.
What was that? Who was it with the 4 hours of sleep? I need to know.
Dan, dude, I'm telling you. I think we'd be more productive if we just took naps. If we lifted.
That book, that 4-hour sleep book, is a crock.
I have a question.
What's up, Velvet?
My goal is to try at a minimum to get the 7 hours of sleep I need, but a lot of times I don't make it. So lately it's like 6 to 7 hours. So does that mean I'm sleep deprived because I'm not getting the 7 to 9 I need?
Yes.
Which is
why you have trouble
Yeah.
with the amount of work you need to do in a day. It's that loop, Velvet, right? Because you get tired and you're less productive. I know you can relate, right?
Your memory,
Yeah.
your ability to remember things, and just like you go slower.
Yeah, my memory is like shot.
Yeah. And then it's harder to do your work because everything's slower. And then you have to stay up longer to get your work done. And then it's very
I'm
hard to
slow
recover.
enough on a regular basis. I can't imagine if I got less sleep, how slow I would be.
Yeah, and at some point, I think it's important to like triage and just decide what are the important activities or important things that you need to do. And this could look like actually fewer workouts for people. It's not uncommon for us to see people get a little bit obsessive, not necessarily like somebody that was training with us, but like you go to any commercial gym, I know I would see people there doing an hour or two of cardio in the morning and then coming back at night and lifting weights. And for as much stress as it is physically, like they probably make more progress if they worked out less and just slept in a little bit. So.
I have a question.
Yep.
So I sleep somewhere between the 7 and 8 hours, but it's not uninterrupted. How many times would be too many times that it's interrupted? So if you get up once or twice during that time, 3 to 4 times during, on average, I probably get up twice during the night.
Emily?
The truth is, I mean, honestly, you're probably waking up even more than that. You don't realize it because you have to really be awake for at least 3 minutes to actually register that you're waking up. So you're probably more impressed than that. So my guess is that you're losing like at least 30 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, and for full disclosure, and it's maybe too, it's just to go to the bathroom.
Right.
I'm not, yeah.
I mean, everybody experiences, people experience that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
you can't prevent that from happening, but
Well, yeah, there's a lot behind that too. Going to the bathroom in the middle of the night.
I would be careful, like if you do get up to go to the bathroom, that you're not like turning on a bunch of lights and things like that.
No. I can actually like kind of keep my eyes closed. So
Yeah, keep the sleep
I
mask
try not to
on.
I try not to let in any light.
It does happen to a lot of people where they like get up and then they like turn the lights on and then they're like, oh crap.
Oh.
And they're laying
Yeah.
in bed.
Yeah, they're up. they
Maria,
check their
I'm the
phone.
same way. I just
Me
stumble my way,
too.
like, down the hall until I
Yeah.
get there, and it's
Right.
Well, the thing too is, like, there's things you can do to try and minimize that, like of not drinking as much water before bed,
Right.
and eating foods that agree with your stomach before bed. That can limit that. And then there's also the like psychological aspect of that sometimes you wake up and you don't need to go to the bathroom, but you just kind of go because you think you need to go. And then you get into that habit of just waking up at the same time every day, whether or not you really have to go to the bathroom. And that's a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah.
well for
No,
me.
I've tried not to do. I've done that before, where I kind of go, all right, do you really have to? Then I'm thinking about it, so then I'm like, all right,
Yep.
if I just got up and went, I'd be back to sleep already.
Yep.
But yeah.
Yeah, that's a complicated problem.
For me, Paul, the cat wakes me up, and yes, I have tried to lock the cat out and ignore the cat and do all of the things, but then I end up awake for longer because he's persistent.
He's trained you. As Tracy would say, he has you trained instead of
You're
you
reinforcing.
training
I
him.
know, but she's told me to like lock him out before, and I have. That's who, if you guys see my stupid faces, I keep yelling at for going crazy in the house. The problem is that like I'll be awake for even longer if I don't. So then, to Maria's point, the cat wakes me up. I wouldn't have woken up to go pee if I didn't get woken up by the cat. But now the cat has woken me up, and so now my body's like, and time to walk to the bathroom.
You gotta get rid of the cat.
In my life before I'll get rid of the cat. You guys know that.
That's
Yeah, right? What do you do when you're trying to train your pet and they just don't care?
You got to train him.
Yeah. I mean, like,
You gotta
full
put in the
disclosure, I love dogs, but I don't know that I would ever get one just because of the huge effect it's had on like life.
Well, the puppies
Cats
can't
are more-
hold it through the
cats are
night.
even more trainable than dogs, though. Cats can be trained.
Right.
Oh, let me just show you what happens when you're trying to train your cat not to wake you up.
No, Tracy, I'm sorry for that.
See
You
this
heard
part?
me.
That's from them trying to get into the bedroom.
That's what I'm saying.
Now I have
Like,
one carpet.
Might have some
I have
incidents on the way, but
more than once to meow for up to 2 hours.
I'll be ready to kill
Like, it's easier to just get up for 30 seconds every night than it is to listen to him meow for 2 hours.
Wow.
Oh, I don't disagree, Kelsey, but then they're laying on me and walking across me and touching my legs.
Trace, he's being so bad today. He's running around my house destroying everything.
You play games with them.
He has plenty of games.
Yeah. But yes, pets are their own obstacle. Again, all of it's very nuanced. There's give and takes with everything in life. And you just have to weigh those pros and cons.
Paul, I think one of the biggest concepts I did get from that Why We Sleep book, though, speaking to kind of Maria's point, was the concept about sleep opportunity. So, if you're trying to sleep 7 hours and, so you're going to sleep 10 to 5, if you're going and laying down at 10 o'clock, you're not sleeping 7 hours. So you need to be in bed for longer than that to get those 7 hours. So having that sleep opportunity for 7 hours is something that, really resonated with me from reading that book.
Yeah, the whole idea of
Need the battery for
time in
this.
bed
For charges
versus
or something.
time asleep.
and if you are
something-
using a Fitbit or anything to like track your sleep, it's going to overestimate how much you're sleeping. So keep that in mind, especially because it's based off of movement. If you're like laying in your bed and you're completely still, it's going to think that you're sleeping or not. So you may be getting less sleep than you think you are.
Yeah, all those sleep trackers are not the greatest.
Correct. And I think too, like there are published papers out there that say, sometimes it can be a detriment to track your sleep using those devices because it actually makes you more anxious about your sleep. So you're just as good basically in a sleep log and keeping track of how much sleep you think you're getting. To be honest.
I think everyone's had that situation where they're like watching a movie or something, and then they get up and their Fitbit tells them they're asleep for like 3 hours. No. I mute people that are loud, so if you're talking, you gotta unmute yourself. Kelsey.
I don't know what you said, Paul. I was talking to Leah, who just woke up.
I just saw your mouth moving and no noise, so.
No, my sister just woke up now. She's 9 though, so she needs all that sleep.
Well, that's a whole nother story is, your circadian rhythm and your optimal time to be asleep is different from person to person, and it changes as you age too. Younger kids tend to prefer to be up a little later and sleep in a little more biologically. So it's kind of fixed in the way they are made. So, school systems fighting that is a whole nother issue. And there's individual differences between people. There's going to be certain people that really thrive, going to bed a little later and sleeping in a little longer. And there's going to be people that thrive going to bed a little earlier and waking up earlier. And I think, everyone kind of has an idea if they call it, like I'm a night person or I'm a morning person. And, that's a real thing. And that's going to be different. And that's biologically set. And again, that's something that you don't want to fight. Obviously, the way society is set up, it's set up for those early risers, and it's kind of detrimented to the people that do better at night and do better sleeping in. But, again, with as much as within our power, we want to try and do what's best for us and find what works for us.
Mhm.
Cool. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Till next month, we'll have another.
Okie dokie.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.